I think.
Okay, thank you.
May we start because, as you can see, I have a lot of panelists, and I think that this session should be. I don't want to say the most interesting one because I'm quite sure that we are going to address the development track, and as we can see, a lot needs to be done. So I really want maybe to say few words to my panelists, because I don't want really this session to be like other, I don't want a lot of talks. But I think what is very important is for us to go into concrete things, concrete proposal. For that, I will ask all my panelists in your intervention to keep in mind that this is not the first meeting on the issue. We already have 2 meetings. We have a meeting in Cotonou dealing with the same issue. In June, we also had a meeting in Ouagadougou dealing with this issue. And we really want this session to be a very practical one. So maybe have in mind 2 things. The first, what can donors and recipients do better? Let's say on the donor side, the donors were very used to come and say, we have a lot of million of commitment that the country is enabled to use this amount. We really want today, for those panelists who will talk about money, let us know what are the commitments and what are the disbursement. Only on the countryside, I know that a very good assessment has been made regarding the needs of the country, in which area there are needs for the cotton to be founding. So if I'm quite sure that the W2 can really tell us a lot on the need of the countries, if we can be very specific on the country needs. And the second thing will seem very important for me is to have in mind that the African countries have short-term needs and they have also long-term needs. How can we address those 2 issues? So I want to call the first speaker, and our first speaker, let me take a look on the paper. I think the first speaker should be Shaidu, what I have on my paper. Yeah, the first speaker will be Mr. Shaidu. Mr. Shaidu, as you know, is presently Director, Technical Cooperation Division at the Secretariat of the WTO. He is one who really knows about a lot about African needs, and I hope that his intervention will really be focused on what the African countries need. Mr. Shaidu, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Can I sit here?
You can sit here.
Okay. I'd like to begin by thanking the Woodrow Wilson Center for hosting this important conference on cotton, and to thank our colleagues from EDS and also from the IPC. I also really do want to thank at a very personal level Raquel Gomez from Oxfam. She organized something similar to a recent ICAT meeting in Brazil. It was very constructive, very well balanced, and I'd like to thank my 2 friends, Nicholas Imboden from EDS and also Charlotte for their own personal commitment to move this work forward in a very practical way. I think the beauty of the exercise that we've gone through today so far is the tone that was set by the moderator in the morning, Professor Thompson, I believe, when he said, we don't come here to speak essentially on behalf of our organizations, but we come here to brainstorm policymakers and academics and a variety of interests in a way that moves the subject forward. I do have a prepared paper. No translation.
Testing, testing.
Okay, thank you. I'll just continue from where I stopped. I do have a paper that was circulated a couple of days ago, and I think it's on the site of the Woodrow Wilson Institute. But I really won't take it as being circulated and addressing even much more than the issues that we need to talk about. But what I would like to address are the issues that the chairman has drawn attention to. What are the practical issues, and how do we deal with them? How have we been dealing with them from the perspective of the WTO, and how can we move forward? So essentially, I'd like to speak to the following issues today. The role of the donors, the role of the recipients, which really has not been called for, but a role that I've always seen as inseparable from the role of the donors. There is no way you can speak coherently or in any practical way that moves this work forward in speaking about the role of the donors if you do not speak about the role of the recipients. I would also speak to the range of needs, the areas of needs that the chairman did ask me to talk about. In what areas have assistance been delivered? And what are the areas where the recipient countries, our colleagues from Africa, have indicated that they would like assistance to be provided? Where I would really like to dwell on in the 10 minutes that I have would be more the problems, the challenges that we've confronted in 2 years of the WTO in trying to implement the mandate of the membership on cotton development assistance. It's easy enough to talk about progress, but it's not a sales pitch. We have made progress. I'll speak to that in seconds. But I think what would be more of interest to you are the problems that we've confronted, the challenges that face us, the challenges that face the cotton countries for whom this is a major issue. And then I'll look briefly at the lessons, some of the lessons we've learned, which hopefully we can extend to some other areas. And then how do we move forward? First of all, what sort of progress have we made? Let's remember that in 2001, at the launch of the negotiations, as was pointed out in the morning, the sectoral initiative on cotton was not on the agenda of the negotiations. It was raised in 2003, and it was raised for all the right reasons, as the C4 ministers have pointed out throughout the course of the day. They raised the sectoral initiative on cotton, not with a view to seeking special and differential treatment, but to invoke the rules of the trading system. And for the first time within the WTO, as Professor Thompson pointed out in the morning, without sounding too much commendatory of the WTO, we grappled as to how to deal with this sort of question. And for the first time, we split an issue into two tracks, a trade track and a development track. We've never had this experience before. We're not a development organization. I am not begging the question, because the contributions that trade makes also have development dividends. So please do not think that I'm begging the question. I am not. But we've never been confronted with this sort of difficulty before. And so we split it into two ways. And all of this morning, what we talked about was a first track of dealing with the issue at the trade policy level. And so that I will not go into anymore. And then at the beginning of the afternoon after lunch, the panel on competitiveness dealt with partly what we're also dealing with in this panel, namely the role of the donors. We have to see that in its coherent whole. What is also important to know is that the work we're doing on the development assistance aspects of cotton is mandate-based work. In other words, whether we like it or not, it's work that we have to do because obligations were created by the WTO membership. Obligations were created for the membership. Obligations were created for the development community, essentially the donors. Obligations were created for the Director General and the Secretariat, and indeed obligations were created also for the recipients as well. And so we began our work in 2004 from scratch, sort of beating around the bush and trying to determine how to proceed. In 2 years, we have been able to, if you like, pull together on the basis of contributions made by the development community, bilateral donors, 3 of them really driving the process: the United States, the European communities, and Japan, and 7 multilateral institutions: the World Bank, the IMF, FAO, UNCTAD, African Development Bank, UNIDO, and UNCTAD. We have had notified to the Director General and to the Secretary that's coordinating the exercise 184 entries of all forms of commitment, and I shall just spell them out in a couple of seconds. And so what we've been trying to do now is to move forward, consolidate, and work on the basis of those 184 specific entries on cotton development assistance. Now, what sorts of areas are those, which is also something the chairman asked me to talk about. Assistance has been delivered and need has been expressed on the part of the C4 in respect of support for development of national cotton strategies, support for domestic reform in the cotton sector and across the economy, the area of trade infrastructure, some of the issues that Mr. Nankani spoke about moments ago: energy, roads, road transportation, railways, irrigation, warehousing, low and reliable cost energy. An area where ICAC, one of the 7 multilateral institutions that I didn't mention, I should have mentioned, is also working. That's systems for testing and classification and labeling, high volume instruments to improve quality and to assist the African cotton exporters in moving away from manual testing into more automated forms of testing. There have been needs expressed for mechanized harvesters, construction and rehabilitation of testing laboratories, the issue of seeds that we talked about in the previous session, seeds that are resistant to diseases and droughts and other forms of pests. And at a certain meeting that the IMF organized in Cotonou, that was in May of 2004, the need was also expressed at the time for debt relief. And we have been able to get forms of multilateral debt relief initiative into the 184 entries. But again, we'll talk about the challenges because even though we've made progress, there's still a lot of scope of what we need to do. And then, of course, there's the whole area of market-based risk instruments that I believe one of my co-panelists will speak about. So these are the areas where we have had some commitments delivered and disbursed, but also areas where the needs have been expressed. Now, I know it's of interest to talk about the challenges that we've confronted. What are the problems that we're having with regard to the implementation of this 184 entries and areas where we consider that we've made progress but where we still have considerable constraints? And there are several. And the reason that one can speak with some degree of authority on this is that recently Benin, Burkina Faso, and Mali have, on the basis of a request by the Director General, have sent in properly considered feedback to the Secretariat that we're circulating to our members, including the development community, the problems that are being faced and their own needs and their own concerns. And the comments have been very constructive. What are they? The first is insufficiency and inadequacy of information. In the areas where assistance have been delivered, information flow is not ideal. And here the problem is even-handed. Our colleagues from the C4 countries have also directed some of the problems to themselves. They are also asking some of their domestic focal institutions, their own focal agencies, to provide information, for instance, on the status of the projects. They want regular status reports. They also want the donor community to provide more frequent periodic updates on operational implementation. They want information about startup dates, completion dates. And so we need to improve together in the area of information flow. It's not as good as we would like it to be. A second problem is that there is a gap between commitments from the development community and the disbursements. It's not a fatal problem, and for a variety of reasons, these problems do arise. And we need to be able to move henceforth to be able to close this gap, to reduce that gap between commitments made, announcements made, and the disbursements. We need to have a better idea of how this works. Thirdly, initially there was a problem that arose, that was raised, but I think that we've been able to reduce, if you like, have a better understanding of that problem. There were some that were, remember, 36 African countries produce and trade cotton, but the drivers of the initiative are Benin, Burkina Faso, Chad, and Mali. One of the problems that they did raise was that they did not quite understand the relationship between some types of assistance that we had categorized as non-cotton specific assistance on the one hand, and cotton-specific assistance on the other hand. In some cases, at the initial period, there had been a huge demand for assistance that goes directly to the cotton sector, for production enhancement, for support of GNAs, for support of producer associations. But if you had listened to the previous panel, and this also had come up in the discussions we've been having with our colleagues from the C4, there is now a better understanding that there's actually a great degree of mutual supportiveness between what you could consider as non-cotton specific assistance. So that's trade infrastructure, and we spoke about energy, low cost, reliable, efficient, and stable. It doesn't have cotton on its name, but it's absolutely vital to increasing yields, to increasing productivity, and to greater efficiency. And that we're now doing better, and because there's a better understanding of it as well. Finally, in terms of the challenges, we had some problems in respect of assistance that had been included in the 184 entries, which predated the mandate, the WTO mandate in 2004 for the work that we had to do. In other words, we had some assistance that were notified by some in the development community that came before 2004. And there was a bit of frustration and annoyance as to, well, why do we have to include it in our counting process? You need to know this because a lot of this is out in the wider society. There have been press articles on it. Some in civil society have raised it. And in this sort of forum, it's important to put all these issues out on the table and have a better understanding. The response from the in some cases, we should say to you that the issue is legitimate, and there's some that privately we've advised some of those involved, perhaps this should be taken out. But in some other cases, there's been a good reason for some of those entries that predated or preceded 2004, because they've constituted the foundation on which those particular donors have continued to build their assistance. And they've said to us, listen, there are lots of things that we can do in a vacuum. Some things we design from the scratch, some things we do from the very beginning, but there are some things that you can do in a vacuum. You have to build on what you've done before, and that makes sense. I will try to explain that to everyone. The final thing with regard to the challenges is that we've also been told by the C4 that there needs to be project assessment. We need to have some form of a system for evaluating the assistance given in the area of cotton development assistance. A lot of this makes sense, and we need to work this out between the donors, the development community and the recipients on how we'll do this, when, at what stage, in what forum, and how to proceed with this. Now, let me talk very, very briefly about the role of the recipients. In terms of the mandates that we have, and the mandates, I'm not spelling all this out, it's in the paper that's been circulated, but it's the 2004 framework. There's an article there, it's paragraph 1B, and it's paragraph 12 of the Hong Kong Ministerial Declaration. They also have obligations. And some of those obligations and responsibilities lie in the results or the outcome of the Cotton Workshop in 2004. And these were generally at 4 levels. Very briefly, in less than a minute. 1, they were also required to reflect cotton sector priorities in their poverty reduction strategy papers, their PRSPs, so that when donors come to there as part of a country development process, they would look at their PRSPs and they would see it there. And frankly, we can say to you at this point in time, they have done so. Secondly, they were also supposed to give us, the Director General has set up a consultative framework process. It's a mechanism that still functions where donors, bilaterals, multilaterals, and the recipients sit together and work to give reports on the domestic reform process. And this is work in progress. And you heard from the Minister of Burkina Faso this morning. They have privatized Sofitex, if I heard it correctly. They have introduced new agencies. They have Socoma, and there was a third one he talked about in the competitiveness panel. I missed the third one. I'm sorry? Yes, that one. Asakoto. Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup. And our colleagues from Benin are also in the process of privatizing the monopoly there, Sonapra, if I understand it. So they've also been reporting regularly to the process on what they're doing domestically. And so at these levels of obligation, they have been working. We did ask for a feedback on the contributions by donors, by the development community, and that they have provided. Now, just to sort of cap off on the role of the donor and the role of the recipient at this particular point, one cannot be seen in isolation from the other. The two roles are inextricably linked. They have a great degree of interdependence. And some of the points that the recipient countries have given us as a feedback to the Secretariat, which we are putting out to the membership, it is no surprise that from the development community, they have also given us the same responses, that they also need greater feedback, that the recipients, in addition to operating in Geneva within the consultative framework process, also need to work in country, that there needs to be a better lockstep relationship, and that a partnership is required and it's one of shared responsibility. Most of the time when we speak about development assistance, we do think that it's a one-way process, and one of the lessons that we've learned in what we're doing on the mandate is that it cannot be. let me round off probably in a couple of minutes by going to two final rubrics. One is the what lessons have we learned, very briefly, and then the final rubric to which I'd like to address myself is what suggestions can we give the chairman and to you for discussions in respect of how we move ahead. Lessons. Cotton development assistance to the WTO is not your ordinary type of assistance. It's assistance under mandate, and it's assistance that's linked to negotiations. It's not your regular run-of-the-mill assistance by any other agency or any other grouping. You decide on development assistance or technical assistance or capacity building, and you do it any which way. It's not quite that way. This is a unique type of assistance established by mandate and linked to the negotiations. So it creates lots of pressures. There are obligations, and it's important to move ahead in terms of a partnership and move ahead constructively. What are some of the lessons that we've learned very briefly? Coordination and coherence are absolutely important. It can be a one-way street. In the programs that have been announced by the United States, for instance, the West African Cotton Improvement Program and the opportunities that they have said exist under the Millennium Challenge account, cooperation account, or by Japan under the TICAD process, or by the European communities under the EU-African Cotton Partnership. One of the points they've made is that the African countries involved, including the C4 that are driving the process, should submit cotton sector projects. Now, this is work in progress, and I'd like to hear what the bilateral donors, some of them represented here, would like to, what their experience have been. But there needs to be better engagement, and I think this is where going to the speech that was made by the Assistant USTR for Africa at lunchtime, I think this is where, again, an appeal would need to go, for instance, to civil society, Oxfam, EDS, civil society doing very good work, and to organizations like IPC, perhaps, to even provide assistance in helping to formulate this sorts of projects. It's absolutely important, because the greater, the faster, the quicker the response, the easier it is to move ahead. Secondly, because it's assistance that's linked to the negotiations, we've had to establish, it's a lesson we've learned, a verification process. The donors are finding out for the first time, and we do talk frankly in one-on-one meetings within the Secretariat. This is not your typical technical assistance or development assistance where you make an announcement and you go home. Well, you can't make an announcement and you go home. We have to go through a process of verification. The C4 are giving a feedback. There's checking, there's counting, there's tracking, there's monitoring, there's auditing. Everyone is being held to accountability. When they do not get cotton formulator projects from the C4, they come to us and they complain. We haven't seen it. When the C4 are made a promise in terms of a commitment and the disbursement doesn't come, they come to us and complain. So it's a unique situation in which we are, and this is an area where we can all, move together. Two final points on the lessons. We did establish a table. The Director General initiated a table. It's a sort of matrix that shows what has been delivered, operational state, stage of completion. But in the back and forth that we've been having, it struck us the more that disbursement is an issue. We're still talking about this, but perhaps one of the things we should maybe do in terms of adjusting that table on cotton development assistance is to have a column and adjust on disbursements. But, this is something we have to talk through with everyone because we need to move forward in concert and partnership and with a degree of amiability where everyone buys in and there is ownership. How do we move forward? Last set of points. scaling up is important. It will never be enough. I do not want to go into either the statement that was made by Minister Maiger or his colleague ministers or those who have spoken in the morning. But these countries have enormous needs. They have enormous needs that are related to food security, needs that are related to the objectives, the development objectives of poverty reduction and to rural livelihood. So the more that we can achieve in terms of scaling up, increasing resources, the better. Secondly, disbursement is an issue. There is goodwill, there is credibility, but it's important that we move faster on several counts. A quicker and faster transformation from programming to operational implementation, reducing the gap between commitments and disbursements. I was reading on the aircraft just coming over here the statement that was made by President Wolfowitz at the French Institute for International Relations last week, actually, in Paris. And it struck me, towards the end of his speech, one of the points he made is that the 15th IDA replenishment is coming up in 2007, very early. And one of the points he made is that he believes that a lot of priority in the 15th IDA replenishment should focus on the objectives of assisting African countries in various areas. Essentially, he was focusing on areas like HIV, AIDS, dealing with some of the catastrophic illnesses and diseases, but cotton also. And I said to myself, just reading this, why not? Perhaps, who knows, and the audience may want to discuss this, if you will. Perhaps there just may be a scope for further movement in the 15th IDA replenishment. The final point on that, and that's it, is there are many who have said to us in the Secretariat that they've expressed satisfaction with what we've achieved. Not we, because we don't deliver anything, just in terms of what the bilateral donors and the multilateral institutions have put together. And they say, we're watching this very carefully. And the point they're making is that there probably are signages between cotton development assistance work and the work that's about to begin in the next stage of aid for trade. That's operationalization, and they consider that possibly that there could be synergies, and perhaps this would be one area to talk about. I have perhaps been a bit longer than 10 minutes, but I'm hoping that... Thank you very much.
Our next speaker will be Mr. Philippe Chedan. Mr. Philippe Chedan is from l'Agence Française de Développement. He came from Paris, and I know that he has a very, 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 very deep experience in cotton. And I hope that his intervention will really be focused on how we can really address some of the African needs. And particularly, I think he will be speaking on the risk management. Mr. Philippe.
Je crois que vous utilisez l'écran.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I couldn't resist the temptation of speaking French, thanks to the excellent work of the interpreters, and thank you so much. I tried to reach a consensus, and I hope it will be satisfying, because my presentation will be in French. My slides are in English, however. I'd like to thank the organizers for allowing me to express myself on behalf of the French Development Agency, which is the public entity of the French government for aid. One of my issues was to talk at the end of the day, that means that a lot of things have been said, which allows me to go very fast for the first part of my presentation. The difficulty is to try to wake you up with novelties considering the time of the day. I hope I will manage this challenge. I was looking at the chairman's instructions, and I was trying to focalize my presentation on a concrete case, which was risk management and managing the risks taken on in cotton sectors as far as price. I think that a lot of things have been said about this, and much better than I would actually say them. So I will rapidly go through the general context. One of the successes of the cotton industry in those African countries is based to the risk management, and this is why it's so important. What are the roles of aid? I will very quickly present the strategy of French aid that is within a European approach, and what are the relative approaches to risks and risks taken as far as price. As far as the background, I think many people have talked about the importance in West Africa. We know the few important parameters about this. Africa is the second cotton exporter just after the U.S. in the world. We heard how many people were involved, and we also heard the importance of those factors on the macroeconomic context. So this was already said many times. I will not go back to this. Now, as far as the results obtained, we need to take into account the period of 1949 to 2003. Dagris is the one that gives us those surveys. You can see here the importance of cotton for West Africa and Central Africa over a period of 50 years. This has been very important for West African and Central African countries. What were the main factors of success? What are the lessons that we can learn from this analysis? I think it is important to remember that among factors of success, we have made the choice of integrated sectors. My predecessor mentioned input credit that was reimbursed at the source. And one of the things that was very important was the guarantee paid to the producers. The guaranteed price was announced before the harvest. So these are different aspects. So the producers had almost no risk because they had a guaranteed price, and we know that producers are risk averse. So very low volatility of prices at the product level, and the low volatility also was combined to various low incentives for ginners to manage price risk. This risk was important because Infinite was the one that was assuming the risk, and behind it the international community. Therefore, you can see that it is particularly important to make the situation change. It wasn't sustainable, obviously, so therefore a new institutional framework was put in place with reforms, as was said before, moving towards liberalizing and privatizing depending on the cases. I think that what was said by Mr. Nakani is that we observed an emergence of farmers' organizations in these industries. And facing these new situations, privatized companies had more and more traders, and those cotton society are much more likely to be very involved in managing the risk. The trend is to go more towards privatizing, liberalizing, but this tended to take the state out of the equation, which is difficult considering the macroeconomic influence of this industry on the farmers. I think today that the situation is very complex, and we need to really look at the role of producers, ginning companies, usually private companies, and the state and government in managing price risks. Therefore, today, we have countries that are much more vulnerable to price volatility. We need to develop a real management capacity in most of the stakeholders. There are challenges concerning aspects that were already mentioned, with prices that show bearish trends with 2 to 3% per year, with a volatility of 25%. This is not particular to cotton. Most commodities are subjected to this kind of volatility. What are the main determining factors? GMOs, technologies that are used, modern technologies, and of course the way subsidies are used in northern countries. The strength of the dollars is actually today also a negative impact for African countries. So this is a deficit that amounts to several $billion, as Mr. Nankani presented earlier. This is an arbitrated issue, and this costs need to be shared. Therefore, what role can aid play under such circumstances? Within the French Development Agency, AFD, we chose to focus on the world price volatility mainly. We started a focus group in order to combine theory and negotiations with the different stakeholders, but also with pilot programs to test different approaches to manage price risk, considering the institutional environment that I presented earlier. This aspect is, of course, just one factor among others. Our objective is also to work on maintaining and building the capacity of the cotton industry. I won't go back to this. I think many people have mentioned this earlier, among whom Mr. Nankani. As far as strategy, we are very close to those mentioned earlier. We are promoting donor coordination in cotton measures. Therefore, in order to reassure the WTO representative, I think it is necessary to say that we haven't waited for Cancun to coordinate our efforts. There were difficulties encountered, and the ones that know the donor's position on cotton industries know that we had a very sensitive, difficult conversation and debate on this. But the dialogue was never stopped. We continually try to find solutions to the dialogue and supported those cotton industries. However, what really stimulated us was the C4 initiative. I think it really forced us to consider our support with a political and strategic perspective, and to better coordinate what we can do in commercial policies and development policies. Hence, the partnership between the European Union and Africa with the 2004 action plan in Paris, and also the Cotton Club, which is what we call an informal tool that can be used to exchange information. This was mainly a European initiative in the beginning, but it opened up to multilateral partners that work on cotton. So as far as price risk management, we aimed at a coordinated approach to find the best solutions, to find the appropriate tools to price management with the main donors, with the main institutions that work on those fields. For example, risk management, the World Bank, and other bilateral donors, the Netherlands, and also the Germans within the European Union. I will not linger on those details. I would like to tell you where we are today now. The point was really to reach a consensus between donors, which was in order to mitigate the risk, the volatility of prices, in order to reducing poverty and mitigate the macroeconomic risks. Our different initiatives work on different levels, among which the European Union, the IMF, and the exogenous shock within the IMF and the World Bank sector that works on those topics. The legitimacy to work on this level is one of the focus of this initiative, the action plan of the European Union and Africa on cotton. Where are we today? Where do we stand? We carried out a certain number of studies since 2004. This topic was criticized, amended, but this gave way to very regular communications between the multilateral institution, but also the African providers. We could really install a dialogue with the donors and with the African cotton industries about these new risk management tools. What is the objective of this risk management tool? It would be to mitigate excessive variations of prices for producers without being in the stabilization logic, and by using tools adapted to the nature and scope of the risk. We are trying to maximize the efficiency of those tools. So we avoid to stabilize the price, and we're still looking for a medium-term and long-term message to the market. This is what I mentioned before about pre-guarantees. Very quickly, in order to not bore you with those technical aspects, this is the model used with historic series on price. We are trying to install non-manipulable reference prices with a pivot price linked to an international price index and automatic operating modalities of the smoothing funds. This would give way to three categories managed by the industry, and that would allow to set up new mechanisms that deal with 90% of the variations of price. There would be a middle tier that would deal with 10% of the price volatility, and the last tier would step in during a market failure with help from the state, the government, or international help. Where do we stand today? Once again, a system with non-manipulable references would be an advantage. Those funds would be advantageous, as well as a system that would allow for rigorous management of and professional management of this fund, and an involvement of the banking sector in those funds, and also different incentives. The system would allow to each stakeholder, state or private producers, to have a say in managing the risks taken. We really need to look at how much effort needs to go into the cotton topic. It is fundamental to be able to talk theoretically in order to consolidate this model. And as far as this is concerned, we are working closely with the institutions that I mentioned earlier, the Committee Risk Management Task Force, but also our colleagues from the European Union. We also need to put in place mechanisms to negotiate with the industry stakeholders on the field in order to be in a cooperation approach and build a bridge between a pretty remote theory and real claims of the stakeholders on the field. So this calls for modification, but also this will lead us to recognize and identify the really the contentious points in those negotiations. Concretely speaking, today we have a joint feasibility study that was carried out from May to June with 5 experts, and the application of different scientific researchers that gave us their theoretical approach to risk management. We also carried out a dialogue with the different stakeholders, the Cotton Club, in June and July 2006, and we should have a evaluation assessment mission by the end of 2006. One of my colleagues is already preparing this. It should therefore take place by the end of 2006. The point would be to prepare this pilot operation as fast as possible in January 2007, if we can, to start and kick off this operation. Considering the efforts carried out, we need to really coordinate our work with the traditional stakeholders, World Bank, and I could have said the European Union colleagues and many more. Our communication with them is regular, whether within central agencies or on the field itself. Thank you for your attention.
maybe after this presentation by a bilateral, it would be interesting to have a presentation from a multilateral donor. So I would call the representative of the World Bank to come for this presentation.
Have we got a PowerPoint?
No,
Do we need a...
No, I'm just going to pull up one slide. Thank you. My name's Mary Bartendak, and I'm responsible for agriculture and environment for West Africa at the World Bank. I'm going to start by talking a little bit about how the aid process works at the bank and with our clients, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about the specific assistance which the bank is either in the process of or planning to bring to the cotton sector. One of the things which I think I want to mention is that, at the World Bank, aid is very much country driven. So it is negotiated on a country basis. And each country has an allocation of money available over a 3-year period. And it's up to the country in discussion with the bank to decide how that money will be used. That's important, because it has an impact on whether or not we can earmark funds for things like assistance to the cotton sector. There are a couple of exceptions. They're both in the health sector. One is HIV/AIDS, and the other one is malaria. Last year there was also an emergency effort on the avian flu. But other than that, it's country driven. So, as Mr. Osakwe said, it starts with the PRSP and the country strategy for their own development. And after that, there is also, at the country level, either a consultative group or a round table, which involves all the bilateral and multilateral donors in discussion about how they will respond to the country's strategy. And under that, there is the bank's individual country assistance strategy, which is negotiated every 3 years with the country. Now, one example of how this bears on the cotton sector is Mali. Okay, we have a new country assistance strategy that is being negotiated right now in Mali. Our instrument in Mali for responding to the cotton sector in part is our extension and research program, our agricultural services program. That's where we channel funds that help the producers' associations and also help the introduction of new technologies. That program is on the chopping block today. So if Mali decides that they have, and I don't know the number, but they have X million dollars available from the World Bank in the next 3 years, the only way we can be confident that that assistance to the cotton sector will stay in there is if the Malians themselves request that it stay in there. And that is a discussion that we're going to have over the next 3 months with the government of Mali. One other thing which I wanted to say is that if you look at what the bank is doing now, the sort of third point down there is supporting reform through development policy, lending, and technical assistance.
Well, the development policy lending, another word for that would be budget support. And each country receives a certain amount of budget support from the donor community each year. And one of the things that is happening right now is that part of the budget is going each year, for I think almost 3 years now in most of these countries, to support the deficits in the cotton sector. Now that's something that is having an impact on what we can do with the rest of the funding going to the cotton sector. And that's why Gobind highlighted that in his presentation this morning. Let me talk briefly about the other points which are up here. The first, technology transfer and capacity building for producer associations. The bank doesn't generally give assistance by commodity, so there are some exceptions. In Benin and Chad, I believe there are specific cotton sector support programs. But in Mali and Burkina, the cotton sector support arrives through our programs for agricultural services, supply chain development, and community development. So there are 3 different programs which are national, which all contain some cotton support inside of them, but they also support other commodities. The next thing I wanted to say is if you're looking at the programming of the bank, there are other sources of funding which come to the World Bank, and one of those is the Global Environment Facility. And through the GEF, we've managed to get financing to look at the question of helping countries set up a framework for testing genetically modified cotton. And that's a program where we are working together with USAID and with AFD to try to coordinate our different efforts. There may be others interested in joining that as well. But that is going to hopefully come into place in the coming year. Then another comment which I wanted to make is if you look at the bottom half of this slide and the analytical work that the bank is doing, it's very important to realize that financing for analytical work at the bank means that we get a little bit of money from the bank's budget and then we go out and we get money elsewhere. So for most of this analytical work, we have a lot of help from other partners. We are working, for example, with the EU on the first 3 subjects there. We've gotten funding also through other consultant trust funds and trust funds available to the bank from the Dutch government, the Swiss government, and others. I think that's important because it means that, you know, when we're out there raising awareness about the importance of looking at cotton through these conferences, it does have an impact on our ability to go out and raise money for the analytical work that we're doing in the sector. Then finally, we are hoping to do more work on looking at the value chain in cotton. And that's something which I think we haven't really discussed. Gobind mentioned it in his presentation. The gentleman from Walmart certainly mentioned it. But we haven't really talked a lot about that in these conferences, and I think that's an area where we may want to discuss some more what the potential is for these countries. Finally, just two things. One is we are having a conference next week on the first subject, what's working and what's not working in cotton sector reform across Africa. We have tried to incorporate the work that's been done primarily by Michigan State University, but also by several others, on Southern and Eastern Africa and combine that with all the work that's been done in Western and Central Africa to look across the board at the different industrial organizations for the cotton sector and how it's working, what parts of that are bearing fruit and what parts are causing problems. One last thing I wanted to mention is for the countries involved, one of the things that we've noticed is that they are not, for the most part, coming to us asking for specific cotton sector support, nor will you see that in the proposals which are being signed with the MCC, which is going to bring a lot of funding to Burkina and Mali and Ghana. And I think that, the same phenomenon that happens with the bank may be happening there. Countries have to make choices about how they're spending these funds if the capital, in our case, often we're in competing with our energy sector colleagues. When the lights are going out in the capital city, sometimes that takes priority. And it's the same with all of the sectors. So resources are scarce. Countries have to make decisions. And, at the end of the day, if you're signing a $500 million deal with the MCC and there's no request for cotton in there, that tells everybody something about the priorities. So that's something that I think we need to think about. One last plea is also that the Gates Foundation is entering into this market with a significant amount of resources. I think that we should all be reaching out to them to help them spend those resources, and they particularly are interested in the introduction of new technologies and new varieties in agriculture. So I think that that could be interesting for those of us who are advocates for the cotton sector. Thank you.
So, thank you very much. Our next speaker is Mrs. Elena Bryant. And Mrs. Elena Bryant is the U.S. Trade Representative for Trade Capacity, Deputy Assistant U.S. Trade Representative for Capacity Building. Ms. Elena.
Thank you. If you don't mind, I think I'll sit here.
No problem.
And I appreciate your attempt at giving me a promotion. Yeah. It's always welcome.
It will come.
It will come?
Yeah, that's it.
Sometimes, though, you have to be careful of the people that actually have the jobs.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm pleased to be here to talk a bit about what the U.S. government is doing to support cotton-producing countries. I noticed that several of my colleagues have talked a little bit about aid for trade, and I think I want to start there because I think it provides a useful overview of where we are in a framework. The aid for trade discussion that's been taking place first in the bank and now in Geneva over the last couple of years has a couple of very relevant elements. One is, as Chetu mentioned, the increase in transparency, in particular to make sure that the people in Geneva and the people in capitals are working from the same information base. And lots of times we find that that's not happening. So I think everyone's trying to make a strenuous effort to ensure that we're all, that information is flowing and that donors are transparent and the countries themselves that are getting the assistance are communicating very fully with the donors, including donors and capitals. Another important piece, which was particularly mentioned by my colleague from the bank, is the importance of integrating trade into national development plans and putting a priority on those trade elements in the context of the larger plans. This is important for the country. It's also important for donors who like to respond to the demands made by countries for assistance, but need to know where particular wishes fit in the larger priorities of the country. For the United States, we've made a strong commitment to assist the C4 countries in Senegal to increase cotton productivity and to more fully participate in world trade. We've done this through regional assistance, country-specific, and also Africa-wide. The 3 USG entities that are primarily contributing to this effort are USAID, USDA, and MCC. USTDA and OPIC are also contributing. For us, I think, as I mentioned, our assistance is demand-driven. This is particularly apparent in the major programs that USAID and MCC are doing with the C4 countries. For USDA, the primary vehicle for addressing cotton needs is the WASIP, West Africa Cotton Improvement Program, which was launched in 2005. Started with an initial commitment of $7 million. In June of this year, we were pleased to increase that commitment to a total of $27 million, which will be dispersed over a 3-year period. The conceptual and technical aspects of this program came from an initial assessment of the cotton sector that was done in collaboration with the C4 countries. Early in 2006, after the program was announced, there was a planning workshop in Benin, which involved producers, civil society, governments, to determine the kind of projects that would be most useful to the recipients under the WASIP. There were 9 key areas that were identified and which form the basis of the WASIP program. This is expansion of good practices, research linkages between U.S. and West African organizations, better classification of seed cotton, establishment of regional training programs for ginners, support for policy development to facilitate private management in the cotton sector, expanded access to high-quality inputs, and exploration of ways to add value to West African cotton through regional processes. I think the elements of WASIP are complementary to the efforts that have been described by some of my fellow panelists. One of the things that was particularly important that came out of this conference was that national advisory committees should be established in each country to guide implementation of the project. That's happening. I think Chedu mentioned that it was important to understand not only commitments but disbursements. Sometimes in the development world, contracting can take a long time. I'm pleased to tell you that USAID moved very quickly to obligate and to contract the WASIP program, which is, I think, the procurement's not done already. It's very close to being done, which will start the activities fairly quickly. I know that you're all interested in MCC, so let me spend a few minutes on that. MCC, as you probably know, was created by the administration with the consent of Congress in 2004, and it offers a new avenue, essentially, complementing USAID, that can provide significant investments in countries to reduce poverty through economic growth. MCC enters into contracts, they call them compacts, with each country that provides 5-year funding for particular projects. Countries design their own programs. As part of the design and the implementation of a compact, MCC requires the recipient country to consult broadly outside government channels, with the private sector, with civil society, and donor partners, with the objective of securing a broad coalition of support for the development investments in that compact. MCC is run by a board, essentially, and each year countries are selected for MCC eligibility based on their commitment to good governance and performance. There are a variety of board members at MCC, including the United States Trade Representative. Of the C4, currently Benin, Mali, and Burkina Faso are eligible countries, and Senegal is actually also eligible. Last year, a 5-year, $307 million compact was signed with Benin. Sorry, it was last February. The compact entered into force a couple of weeks ago. Benin chose projects that seek to increase investment in private sector activity by improving land tenure, access to financial services, improving the judicial system, and removing constraints to trade at the port of Cotonou. A significant share of this investment falls within the rubric of aid for trade, and we believe will contribute positively to Benin's ability to move product to market, including in the cotton sector. For its $460 million compact, which will be approved by the MCC board this week, government of Mali chose investments that will increase production and productivity of agriculture and small and medium-sized businesses, as well as expanding Mali's access to markets and trade. As with Benin, a significant share of these investments fall under aid for trade and will support Mali's productive sectors. Neither of these compacts have specific cotton elements, but have substantial non-cotton support elements. Ambassador of Burkina Faso told me that his government has submitted its compact proposal to MCC this week, and we look forward to seeing that as a board member as soon as MCC is ready to share. And we know that Senegal is also working on its compact proposal with MCC. We do a variety of other things, which I won't go through because I have a very long list. But I'm just pleased to say that we were happy to contribute in a substantial way. I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think, we still have two speakers, and the next speaker will be Mrs. Anneli Tikkanen, who is a trade counselor at the delegation of the European Commission.
Monsieur le Ministre, l'Ambassadeur.
Mr. Ministers, Mr. Ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen, thank you.
Thank you so much for
Merci beaucoup.
for the organizers for the temperature control here, because I'm sure it's because you wanted to keep both the audience and the presenters awake at this late hour. I had to dress up a little bit in between because I was getting too awake, I'm afraid. Anyhow, if I put on my reading glasses and seem to be reading from my papers, it's because I'm fairly new to the cotton sector, and the people in Brussels wanted to ensure that I repeat the company lines. Bear with me. Well, in my presentation, I would like to explain the main features of EU assistance to cotton in Africa, as it is provided by the European Commission. Moreover, I would like to give you an update of what the EC stands at the moment in terms of implementation of its promised support. I will start the presentation by saying some words on the EU-Africa Partnership on Cotton, which was mentioned earlier, which forms the overall framework for the support by the EU to the African cotton producers. Next, I will give an overview of commitments made and I will conclude by both sketching prospects for further support and raising a number of questions around the development cooperation on cotton. When in April 2003 the 4 African countries took the sectoral initiative on cotton to the WTO, the EU answered with the EU-Africa Cotton Partnership, which was endorsed in July 2004. The partnership included agreement on a plan of action, and this plan of action still guides the implementation of cooperation to date. It covers 7 action areas. 1. International trade. 2. National and regional strategies. 3. Policies and institutions. 4. Technological innovation. 5. Risk management and finance. 6. Chain integration. And 7. Coordination. Moreover, the action plan indicated levels of responsibility at national and international level for governments, sectoral stakeholders, regional organizations, donors, and others. The main development objective of the plan of action is to support the African cotton-producing countries through improvements in competitiveness and in a reduction of vulnerability. In practical terms, African countries are expected to define cotton strategies involving all stakeholders, while the donors, including the EU, provide support for the implementation of elements of the strategies that can benefit from external resources. The type of assistance is therefore not predetermined, but dependent on local situations and priorities as expressed in the national strategies. This was also, I think, seems to be the modus operandi in World Bank and in the US side. And on our financial responses, since mid-2004, the EC has allocated additional development assistance resources to cotton at several levels. At the all ACP level, a 45 million euro program on capacity building for commodities has been prepared, with at least 15 million euros set aside for cotton. This program will provide assistance in a number of areas, including strategy development and risk management, while it also covers specific support, standardization, and machine-based testing for cotton. The proposal received a positive opinion on the EDF committee on the September 19, 2006, and will be operational from early 2007 onwards. At the national level, additional resources were made available in the framework of the midterm review of 2004 and 2005 for Mali, Benin, Burkina Faso, as well as through a reprogramming of leftover funds from the STABEX resources, for example for Senegal, Côte d'Ivoire, Togo, Mozambique, and Tanzania. All in all, the EC has allocated around 100 million euros to cotton since the partnership has concluded. EU member states, notably France, Germany, and the Netherlands, have added their own cotton assistance programs, and in conjunction with the EU, EC plus the member states has earmarked well over 200 million euros for cotton-related development assistance, mainly to Africa. Formulation of EC cotton support programs and projects related to the newly allocated funds has taken some time, we admit that, but is now well advanced. All projects and programs should be operational by 2007. In addition, I would like to mention that the EC is one of the main providers of general budget support, and many of the African cotton growing countries are among the recipients of this form of support. Budget support is a general form of external support which feeds the financing of national public expenditure priorities. When national budgets are sufficiently directed towards cotton development, budget support also assists this sector. In the past few years, African cotton growing countries have received over 300 million euros per annum in general budget support from the EC. And then some words on the future prospects. The EU remains committed to supporting the African cotton-producing countries in the framework of the EU-Africa Partnership on Cotton. However, the support should be provided based on the strategic vision and a clear strategic plan that is supported by the cotton sector. Support projects or programs need to be based on such a national strategic approach. With respect to financial assistance, further financing could come from the 10th annual EDF. The EDF committee is made up of the EU member states and provides opinions on the implementation of the European Development Fund resources on the basis of priorities set by cotton-producing African countries. The formulation of the 10th EDA country support strategies is taking place in the course of 2006 and is reaching an advanced stage of preparation. The exercise is largely demand-led, and the EC support is supposed to reflect national priorities. With the importance of cotton in the economies of many West African countries and the regular requests for development assistance to cotton that are expressed in the framework of the WTO negotiations and elsewhere, one would have expected cotton development to be among the priorities. The programming exercise of the 10th EDF is not yet finalized. Nevertheless, early indications are that none of the cotton-producing countries will place great emphasis on cotton assistance on the 10th EDF programs, and this is for the period of from 2008 till 2013. Cotton will at best be dealt with as a component with private sector development within the transport sector, rehabilitation of cotton roads, or within governance. A lack of prioritization for cotton would clearly be disappointing and highly compromise the ability of the EC to continue cotton assistance in the period beyond 2010. But as Mary referred earlier, governments have also other priorities than perhaps cotton, so we understand it's a delicate issue. Some reflections. I would like to end this brief presentation with 2 points of reflection. First, when dealing with cotton in West Africa, one can and should should no longer avoid the question of the exchange rate. For too long, this has been a taboo subject, and clearly the strength of the euro, and therefore the local currency, the franc CFA, versus the dollar, continues to harm cotton producers in the region. The gains in the world market price for cotton in the previous season were more than offset by the strengthening of the franc CVF in the same period. As cotton trade is carried out in US dollars, cotton producers are interested in a certain stability versus the dollar, while the West African currency is tied to the euro. From a cotton perspective, this arrangement is in urgent need of reflection and possibly adaptation. There are real risks that whatever is done to restore competitiveness in the West African cotton sectors would be undermined by the adverse exchange rate developments. Second, in terms of development assistance, there are no magic bullets. Situations in countries differ, and responses will therefore also have to vary with national problems and priorities. Nevertheless, there are a number of areas which seem useful in nearly all settings, including the strengthening of the producer organizations, setting up of an interprofessional organization, and rehabilitation of basic infrastructure. However, such interventions can only have a meaningful effect when more fundamental reform questions are also addressed, including the way producer prices are set, companies are managed, and input and service delivery is organized. This in turn requires a strategic vision on the sector, something the EU-Africa Partnership placed high on the agenda but has not been following thoroughly. And as our moderator said in the beginning that you wanted to also discuss later on what could be done better, and I suppose from donors' point of view, we could be faster in actually delivering the money, but as I understand, there are certain procedures and they take time, and I know that EU has never been one of the quickest decision makers, which we admit. We are 25, going 27, so bear with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you too. Our last speaker is Mr. Britton. I don't know if he's okay. He's from USAID. I think he has some thought he want to share with us. Mr. Just 5 minutes.
Yeah, I promised our chair. Thank you for giving me a moment or two. I'm Brenton Bowling from U.S. Agency for International Development. I was just going to supplement a few things that Elena brought up. She actually covered many of my talking points, so I can make this very, very short. Excuse me, Brenton Bowling. First of all, we basically, when the USG started dialogue with the cotton countries, we broke the development aspects of the cotton of the WTO round into two additional pieces. We picked up sort of a short-term track for delivery and assistance and sort of a longer-term track. Right now, we're we'll be awarding in the next month or so in December an implementer for our West Africa Cotton Improvement Program. In the meantime, we have been delivering assistance already to Cotton 4 countries. I wanted to mention some of the programs that USAID and USDA have been delivering. For example, in Burkina Faso, we've been supporting field trials of some of the biotech, doing some training in pre-market environmental risk assessment, also doing some gene flow studies. We've been supporting that. We have kind of on the docket that's going to be implemented by USDA during this next first part of 2007, fertility management training, which will involve West African participants, and also ginning and cotton classing. We actually have our coordinator here from USDA who's working on these, Don Evans. So if you have any questions, you can direct it towards him. Aside from that, I was just going to mention the fact that once we have awarded the medium-term implementer that's more focused on a institution building, we will have meetings with each of the Cotton 4 countries to determine a national plan. We'll be working with their committees that's been established, and we hope that will happen in the first part of next year. Aside from that, I think all things are on track from the U.S. government's assistance side. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we still have 10 or 15 minutes for questions. And, do you have? Maybe we'll start with the Minister of Benin. Let's be very brief because I think we have very short time for question and answers.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have a question, but I have comments. I followed with much interest the different presentations. I'd like to commend the various assistance programs within the MCC and others by other donors. I, however, think that we need to make a distinction between the problem that cotton has through subsidies and the other problems. Those problems do not solve our problem. When you don't pay the cotton farmer what he should be receiving, if he gets sick, he can't afford medication. If he cannot send his kids to school, this has nothing to do with the competitive aspects of the economy or the infrastructure problems. We need to make a distinction. What we want is not sprinkling of funds. We want to have a really deep solution and not a stopgap measure. If we really want to be serious about fighting poverty, we should start, first of all, to deal with the problems of equity on the global trade. We are told to open markets, but if there's no equity, how can we open our markets? First of all, we need to have equitable markets and then think about opening them. If we keep systems that have such distortions, we're putting the cart before the horse. So we need to really look at concrete solutions, trying to see how to tackle the problems, the substantial problems, and not the effects. These were my comments. I didn't have much time. Thanks. I apologize.
Thank you, Ambassador. I heard very clearly from the panelists that there's room for improvement. Recipients, or in World Bank speak, clients, need to be clearer about their cotton-specific needs. And donors maybe need to be a bit faster on the disbursement side. What I would like to ask is what can be done better on the sort of donor coordination side. I mean, there's a lot of support that everybody has talked about. How well are donors speaking with each other and getting the recipients involved and having sort of a better overview of what everybody's doing, maybe exchanging some best practices? Is the WTO forum the place to do that? How do you see the future with regard to donor coordination?
Yes.
Ann Tutwiler with the Hewlett Foundation. If I can just follow on to that question. We've been talking a lot about competitive and comparative advantage in terms of various countries, and it strikes me that each of you up there is doing more or less the same thing in terms of the aid that you're trying to offer, and I doubt seriously that each of you has a competitive advantage in all of the things you're trying to do. And so I wonder if you all could address the fact that perhaps some of you might want to focus a bit.
Okay. Yes, the World Bank.
Thanks. I think those are two important questions. I just want to give our experience on the donor coordination side. I think that we feel like people are working together at the country level pretty reasonably. We give it our best effort. There is usually a agricultural donors group in country which meets regularly and usually includes a representative from the government as well. Now, the challenges come more at the sort of global level where from the bank's perspective, we participate in the sort of informal cotton club, and we also coordinate usually through our executive director's office with the different agencies involved from the U.S. government. Our question has been for some time whether those two groups are coordinating together and not just through the World Bank. So I would put that on the table. And then the next issue which you raised, I do think people are specializing maybe more than came across today, but if you think about the emphasis which the U.S. government has put on helping with the considerations around genetically modified cotton, that is less of a priority from the European side for good reasons. And, you know, so that is an example of specialization where I think it works out quite well for our clients. The bank may be a bit all over the board, but we also, because we are trying to be client-driven, try to focus wherever they're asking us to focus. And that's something which, you know, I think we share with our other partners. There's always scope, not just in cotton, but in just about all of the work which the donors are doing, for the governments to play a bigger role and to have a stronger voice. And we talk about this all the time with our clients. They should be out there telling the donors what to do and insisting that the donors do it. And I think the more that they do that, the better the coordination will be.
Thank you. Yes.
Yes, the minister from Mali.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Je voudrais remercier
I would like to thank the different presenters in the group of the ministers that follow this issue since 2004. When we met yesterday, some of them called me the veteran in a friendly manner because I did follow this issue. I've followed this issue for a long time. There were some bones of contention, but I find today that the discourses are the same. The speeches that we heard are the same that we heard in 2004, but with different people. The same things are being said. This is why when my colleague from Benin talked in a very straightforward manner, I asked for a little bit of diplomacy because we can say this without rejecting what was said before. I have the feeling that there is an issue, a question is posed, we don't have a solution immediately. We cannot politically respond to the African demand or the African claim. So we're offered what is considered as a solution. Development aid is offered, but the countries that do not have an issue with cotton also receive that aid. So this has nothing to do with cotton. I remember the figures that the European representative just said, 200 million for African countries. In 2005, President Bamako said the same thing in Africa. When he left, we realized that this had nothing to do with cotton. This is the budget allocated in the framework of development. It was all very nice. It was nicely put in a speech, but it had nothing to do with cotton. We verified, we checked with ambassadors, and we found that it was more of a publicity effort, PR solution, if I may say so. However, after listening carefully to everyone here, I have the feeling that although we are not necessarily finding a solution, there is a will to go forward. I really felt this personally. Without quoting the names of the countries and the names of their representatives, we cannot be fooled. The presenters cannot bring something new. They communicate the official positions that we are already aware of. But it seems like there is a general will to go a little bit forward. I don't think there is a magic bullet, was said. There is a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel from what I can hear in the speeches, and we need to really hang on to that light. It is positive. What I would like to suggest now is that the World Bank, which plays a coordinating role within donors, could initiate a meeting on that specific topic within the coming weeks in order to focus the proposals that we've heard on cotton and maybe review the obstacles that have arisen. I have heard some say that countries need to come up with their own proposals and that the countries themselves did not take cotton as a priority. It is not the place to really be controversial. But when our countries proposed something on cotton, we were politely told that it would be better to concentrate on something else. In national budgets, in the recent years, countries are really tight because of those problems linked to the cotton deficit. Our partners impose conditions to the government, and this creates a lot of tension. This could also lead to political crisis. What I am suggesting is that, considering how blocked the negotiations are, how we urgently need to find a solution for the cotton industry within 1 or 2 years in our countries, today, the main tool to fight poverty could be this one. We could really build on the will that I think I heard in this conference, beyond all the words that were uttered, beyond the controversial topics that we've raised. I think that we can combine those three topics, and we could come up with a formula in order for the stakeholders to meet and see what could concretely come up out of this within 1 month, before the end of December. I think it could really give us hopes. The presentations of the French Development Agency came up with a lot of ideas that seem very interesting. If only we could build on this and share all of these ideas. I am deeply convinced that the issue of cotton is so crucial today that with a few modifications here and there, we could help the countries involved. Within the World Bank, because of the deficits due to the cotton industry, would like a little bit more flexibility towards our government. Within the European Union, I know that my country is one of the greatest beneficiaries of the European Union aid. So we need to find a solution on a specific topic. These would be more or less acceptable solutions in order to survive 2006, 2007, while we put in place longer-term solutions. Therefore, if all these measures are accepted, if in global trade relations equitable rules are not established, we will be in the same situation in a few years. But that's another debate altogether, and this is why I would like to make this proposal. Thank you. I think that we have reached the conclusion of this session. I would like to take advantage of the minister's remarks so that we don't walk away without a sort of synthesis. I have a couple of things to add. First, our panel was focused on the role of donors. However, it seems that it should have also talked about the role of beneficiaries, because they have a role to play in expressing their needs. I will also underline that it is important, while we communicate with our donors and partners, to say that cotton in our countries plays such an important role that if we don't pay attention, we will end up with a destabilization of macroeconomic indicators because of cotton precisely. Therefore, when we talk about introducing cotton within the framework of reducing poverty, but if cotton is not aided, all these frameworks will not be sustainable. Consequently, there is an urgency, even for the credibility of the donors, because there are accompanying the countries, and they need to have also success stories to build on. In one of the presentations that I heard, I heard success stories, and I think it is very positive to have some of these. So I think that the donors themselves need success stories. Therefore, in beneficiary countries, we need to continue the dialogue to really pinpoint the needs of the countries, but we also need tools able to measure the impact of partners and of donors' assistance. Are the funds allocated really meeting the needs? This is what we need to look at. As far as donors, I think that the conversation demonstrated that we need to go further, that we needed more than good intentions. The minister from Mali was very clear. Millions of euros were pledged. But when we look at the precise allocation, it didn't have anything to do with cotton. Exactly. So we need to really see what was dispersed, was delivered. This really needs to be done. And in order to do so, I think that the European Union representative said it, because sometimes donors, when they're committing, they know that money cannot be disbursed for a certain time because their procedures are very complex. So, we need to work on the procedures themselves. Donors need to think about this, because at the end of the day, the procedures that are the most important are the national procedures. As far as donors, it seems to me that, and Mary said it, they need to improve coordination. Even if it's sectoral coordination, at least in order to be able to communicate, to share success stories. Therefore, we need to continue to work on coordinating better. Coordination, or rather, the country itself needs to be a leader in coordination. The problem is that when you gather people around a table, they all agree, but then after a while, differences appear. Therefore, it is the role of the country, but also the donor's role to help coordinate better. Apart from that, the consistency of the policies with the national policies is important. Are the donors following the national policies? How do these donor strategies reinforce the national policies? I think this is very important. In order to go back to concrete points now, it is important to say that Africans have expressed short-term needs, and we've heard a lot of good things. We need to really commend what has been said. However, most supports that have been mentioned today are about long-term approaches, 5-10 years. However, we are talking about tomorrow. Even if I saw this little light at the end of the tunnel, I'm looking at ways to mitigate price fluctuation, because we never know how much cotton will sell for. How can donors help each one of them? The mechanism that was described on a kind of insurance taken in order to reduce the volatility of price, this can be useful. However, if we could express one wish, and we know the donors, we work together, but it is an idea needs to be to the benefit of the country. If it hasn't been expressed by one donor, even if it's good, other donors will not espouse this because it's not coming from them. Therefore, we need a sort of guarantee, an insurance for prices. We're not in a stabilization system like we were before, but we need something to help us to mitigate the price fluctuation within a certain range. I think this, if there's one thing that was important today, that's the one. Two more things. I didn't hear the speech from the World Bank president in Paris, but if he said that in IDA 15th replenishment, he could really focus on African problems, this would include cotton disease was mentioned, but cotton is also a disease. Therefore, within the circles of the ministers of finance and the ambassadors in Washington, D.C., we need to talk to the World Bank in order to include the issue of cotton within the 15 IDA replenishment. The World Bank funds world programs, but I think that we need to really focus on this issue. Can there be a meeting, specific meeting of donors on this financing need? But this would have to be a serious meeting. We have had meetings of that type before and we had no concrete result. Therefore, it would be good that if the World Bank could take the leadership and coordinate a meeting on the financing issues and complementary financing in order to have a sustainable cotton industry in the coming years. This is the comment I wanted to finish with so that we could really appreciate the help of our different donors that have helped us. We're going through a hard time, but the point is to know that tomorrow will be better. And this is what I wanted to stress.
Yeah, I just want to say something on the coordination side. The World Bank is not going to engage to call another conference to discuss this subject again. I want it to be clear that, you know, I'm not sure even what resources we're talking about that we're having difficulty being released. There are not resources through the bank, and I don't know from France or from the EU or from the US that there are resources either. And I'm not sure what the expectations are on the side of the Cotton 4. So I think we need to be very clear about that at this stage. It's not worth continuing to have these conferences with that objective being articulated quite clearly and fairly by the African side. But, you know, I don't know what resources we're talking about. The problem is the subsidies. There is no promise of compensation that I know of, and I know that nobody likes the phrase compensation, but I think we need to use it. And so it is not fruitful to keep meeting to discuss how that will be coordinated. We have our aid programs, which are separate, which look at agriculture across the board, which focus on cotton as an important part of that in these countries. But it is not linked to the WTO process at the bank. Now, that may be different in the EU. She's shaking her head, or in the U.S. government.
Oui, vous voulez dire un mot, Monsieur le Ministre?
Monsieur le Ministre. Votre micro, s'il vous plaît. The microphone, please.
Ce n'est pas parce que j'imaginais qu'il y a un financement quelque part.
I didn't mean to imply there was some financing somewhere. What I was saying was that in the presentations that I followed carefully, even if the speeches seem to be the same ones as a year ago, 2 years ago, I felt personally a desire to espouse a new approach. For example, when this problem was posed, the MCC programs weren't there. And most of our countries were not eligible. However, this year we're observing a positive evolution with Benin and Burkina Faso having access to these, as well as Mali. These countries abide by the criteria established by the American government, but I think that we need some the American government to grease the wheel better. We need to make those problems more smoother or lighter. We need to take into account these very severe difficulties. Therefore, the MCC is making a difference since 2004. When we met American officials yesterday, what came out is that our countries did not submit cotton in their packages. Therefore, and we were discreetly told that it wasn't the point. So maybe we could find arrangements. We could talk about, we could once again talk about urgent issues in 2006 and 2007. Price volatility is what concerns us. How can we face those urgently? The EU representative said it. There is a 200 million fund. I said it. But every time we have urgent issues on these types, the EU was there to help us. The bank did not announce funding, so I do not assume that the World Bank will have more funding. However, in order to coordinate all this, someone needs to take the initiative somewhere, at some point. When we talk about donors, everybody thinks about the World Bank immediately. I think it would be useful to gather the donors on Africa in order to see what can be done as opposed to what was said before, and what can be done towards helping with the negotiations that are currently at an impasse within the WTO. In order to take into account this reality, in order to really help African countries face those emergencies, we need to really build on those new ideas that came up. I think that this could make a difference. In the framework of such a conference, I think there are some openings for our countries that could help coordinating with the EU and France also. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to seize what was said by the minister. I think that I understand his analysis. Despite appearances, I think things are moving forward. Slowly, too slowly, indeed. But there are new partners. They are welcome to join. And we need to understand that there are traditional partners on cotton. Some of the partners have recently discovered a passion on cotton after Cancun. And there are no good or bad partners. We really need to welcome everyone and coordinate our efforts to help the industry, the cotton industry. The idea of a great forum might not, however, be the great solution. It would not be a solution in Paris, Brussels, or Washington. I think what really could solve or help move forward today is that we have seminars at a national level. I think that public authorities, along with the stakeholders within the industries, should take decisions within their own countries. It is their sovereign decision that would help tell the donors where they are and what they want. This is the Declaration of Paris on aid efficiency that we're going back to. And I think we need to take it to a T and really put the donors in front of their responsibilities. This is a kind of exchanges that we need. Today we are ready to have a rich debate and say, where are the French on this front? Where are the Americans? And so on and so forth. And the advancement of these different programs, where we understand that we are finally at an implementation level. We all mentioned 2007, inshallah, God bless, and we will, of course, take into account need for procedures, but I think that this debate should not happen at an international level, but rather at a national level with the different stakeholders. Today, there is not one stakeholder within the state, but we have professionals in each industry. When I hear Mr. Traoré, I can say that I'm proud to be working in development. So we really have an industry, a specific approach, and I think a debate within each country could really help coordinating our different complementary advantages. This type of exercises, Mr. Minister, would be more beneficial, and this is what I think we should consider. Thank you.
Well, I think that we need to realize that, yes, we have subjects that need to be discussed, and people who need to think about these issues should meet, and we will be meeting. So the minister's idea was a very enlightening one, and I think that we cannot forget this, or we can ignore it. The countries, of course, are going to come together and draw their conclusions, just as the Minister of Commerce and Trade has been following these discussions, and I'm sure that very quickly they will be able to very quickly propose very concrete proposals, so that we can therefore see concrete solutions. Of course, I don't want us to forget that everything that's been said today about the role of donors, that this is all can only be sustainable if we continue to think about the other issues that we talked about before, the problems in terms of liquidity, fair trade, and also things that we have at our very own doors, capacity building in our countries, continuing with political reform, greater awareness among those who are active in the sector. That is to say, there are some basic conditions that need to be met before we can ensure the sustainability of this sector. And on that note, I'd like to thank you for your patience, and I'd like to excuse us. I'd like to apologize to the next group of panelists for having gone over our time, but thank you very much for these wonderful speeches. Thank you.
If I can move, I think I'm frozen in place.
Thank you very much.
Please do.
If you have some question related to our proposal, call me. Yeah.
I won't see it for a while. While you're still negotiating with MCC.
They won't send it to you. Okay.
I can get John Hugo to tell me what's in it,
Yeah.
but he won't send it to me.
He won't send it.
Hi.
My name is Abraham from Nigerian Embassy.
Hi.
In your presentation, you said something about
Is it possible to get a copy?
Sorry?
Elle était malmenée là, par la France.
You stole one of the points, but I'm going to hit it again because I don't hear it enough.
Good, because then, Philippe undermined me by saying we still need another
Ok, merci. Bon. Ok. On va pas durer, on va pas faire le tour.
Elena Bryan from USCR. I've heard all about you from Harvard.
Barbara was one of my students.
Well, I remember she and I shared an office for a while.
On prend les deux ici. You will be the last. On va se rester là.
Vous mettez les deux béninois ensemble.
Oui, je sais pas, j'ai pas trouvé. Marché? Ça marche?
Non, ça marche, oui.
Bon, je crois on va aller. Ladies and gentlemen, sorry to interrupt the little discussion, but we are late, so I think we have to move ahead. My name is Nikolai Imboden. I am the Executive Director of Ideas Center and co-sponsor of this meeting and the moderator for the final session now of this very long day. First of all, let me congratulate you, those of you who are still here. I think you have shown that you understand the cotton issue. You understood that cotton cannot be solved in half an hour, that you have to have stamina to staying power to get a solution to the cotton issue. So congratulations for that. You're also ready for WTO because, as you know, the negotiations last very long. We are having three panelists. They are here not because they wanted to be here. They have been nominated by presidential decree. And they will try to give some justice to the richness of the discussions that have taken place up to now. It is first Minister Somanu of Benin, Minister of Industry and Trade, who will draw the conclusions of a country politician responsible for the cotton sector. We will then have Ambassador Samuel Ameu. He is the permanent representative of Benin in Geneva and, by the way, also the coordinator of the C4 in Geneva. And he will draw the conclusions from the point of view of negotiators in Geneva. And then finally, last but not least, we will have a more scientific conclusion by Robert Thompson, who will have to be neutral there and try to make sure that everybody is covered in their things that they had to say during this day. The advantage of the moderator is that he basically does not have to make the conclusions, but he just can make comments, which makes it much easier. And that's actually, if you allow me, I would like to make just a few very personal comments. I am one of the persons, Minister Maiga has said, he's getting tired because he has been there from the very beginning and other people have changed persons and therefore they are fresher. I am also one of the persons who has followed this initiative together with our African friends from the very beginning. And I think one of the things that allows us to see basically what has changed, from the beginning. And, quite frankly said, if we look at it, my God, I think we have come a long way. When you look at the beginning, when this whole initiative was started, I mean, people basically said, well, come on, don't cry at the WTO. Go and cry at the UN. Make the political statement in UN. If you want development, we are a serious organization, WTO. We are not speaking about this soft stuff of development. This is business. So if you want money, go to the World Bank. Don't come here and speak about compensation and whatnot. Basically, it was refused as a thing. And then you all remember Cancun, which was in one sense amazing because there was a lot of support for this cotton issue in the press and so on. But at the same time, there was a very negative feeling about it. Remember the Americans, they basically denied that there was a cotton problem. They said, just diversify, get out of cotton and let us continue subsidize. And, the commissioner of the EU, and we won't name him because he is now the Director General of WTO told the Africans that they were not reasonable, with their requests and so on. So it was, basically people did not enter into a fair. If you listened here today, what happened is it's a completely different situation. I mean, we see the Africans who are not asking wild things, they are coming here. As a matter of fact, I was very touched because the Africans here were actually the most moderate ones in their requests. I mean, it's the Americans who were more aggressive. It's the Brazilians who were more aggressive about the impact of the subsidies and so on. The Africans came and they said, actually, we are here to dialogue. I think we were speaking a lot about elephants, and I think, the Africans have shown, by coming here that they understood how you treat elephants. They tried to stand in front of them, and they nearly got trampled in Cancun. Then they tried to push them from behind, but if you're a mouse and you try to push an elephant, you don't get very far. And they have understood, by coming here to Washington, they have understood that if you want something, an elephant, to go in the right direction that you want it to go, what you have to do if you're a mouse, you have to climb on top of it and tickle it behind the ear, and that's the way you might get him to be going. That means you have to convince them that you have a case and that it is in the interest of everybody to dialogue and to come to something. And if we have today, when we listened to what it was said, I mean, the factors that trade and development go together, everybody agrees with that. Everybody agrees with that subsidies do have an impact. We might disagree whether it's 5%, 10% or 15%, but everybody agrees that there is an impact. Everybody also agrees that it's not only subsidies that make the prices go down, that there are other issues that have to be dealt with. I was quite amazed that an EU representative was speaking so openly about the link between CFA and the euro for the competitiveness of the cottons. So, I think a lot of issues have come out where everybody agreed, that there is not one big bang solution. It's not a problem that we can solve if one person does something, that we have all to collaborate together to do something. And that does make me feel good, and I feel very positive about this in this discussion. Now, there is another aspect to it. I mean, it's not all positive. I mean, we do have still a long way to go. We have come a long way, but we still have a long way to go. And I think we still have to learn to more think about what we can do rather than asking the other what he has to do, and give lessons to the others, probably trying to do what we have to do. So this is a whole process. We are agreeing on the objectives, but we are not agreeing on how we get there. So there is still a long way to go. And at the same time, I think, and that came out in the last panel very clearly, is there is an urgency. There is, we have got a problem in the cotton sector in these countries. So we have to find a solution, that takes into account that solutions are not made by a big bang overnight, but at the same time that we have to make sure that these people can survive. And the way the last discussion went, I was quite happy, because at the beginning I was afraid that it might give a bad note, but at the sense it didn't, because it showed, yes, we are not yet there, but no, it's not the same situation as 3 years ago. There is some willingness to do something. I think the risk management, which combines both market elements to look at volatility of prices and some support for the safety net aspects of price mechanism, is an attempt to go into a direction that takes into account this situation. We haven't yet accepted it, I think. Nobody has accepted it, but we are going in the right direction, and let's hope we are working on. I have really only, and then I'm going to stop, I have just 3 points that I would like to make, because I think they might help in trying to get the conclusions. One is, I thought one of the interesting things in this meeting was that a lot of people said very interesting things, but sometimes it was the wrong person who said it. When I heard what's his name, Mark Lange speaking about the impact of the Chinese and the Indians, and actually that the Africans should look that the emerging markets are doing their part for the WTO. He was damn right. Maybe we all would have preferred that he speaks about what the Cotton Association is doing to get subsidies down in the US. But that's another issue. Let's forget, that we wanted him to talk about other things. But let's look at what he said and actually take it serious, because there were some good messages. And I think that happened in several areas that we might have not listened completely because we wanted to hear something else. But we should have, and I hope we all listened and to get something out of it. That's one point that I wanted to give away for the conclusions. The second point, and I think it is a very important point, is also, I think several people mentioned it, and that's the need for innovation. I think we negotiated now for 3-4 years, and we haven't gotten anywhere. And there are some reasons for that. It's not only because cotton is a difficult issue or because agriculture is a difficult issue. It is. But it's also because the system has changed. We are 150 countries now negotiating, and no more a few that can make the good weather or the bad weather. We need new ways of thinking of how we come to a conclusion. And I think also we need new ways about looking how do we combine aid and trade. When I think about it, when I saw Mary, smiling, when Jadu was giving lessons about how to do aid, I thought it was a nice improvement, because I think 3 years ago she would have left the room, So, we are starting, to get to see how we can work together. We don't want to instrumentalize aid to have a bad trade deal. I think we all agree on that. But we all know that it's not enough to get opportunities in markets, that we need also aid to make sure that these opportunities can be actually materialized. And I think what the Cotton Council and what the Americans with the MCA do, and what the EU is trying to do in the Cotton Partnership and so on, goes in the right direction. We have problems of operationalizing it. But I think we are getting slowly but surely there. And I think that's a very positive element. And the last point that I wanted to make, and I think it's a very, very important point, and if you allow me to paraphrase one of the great presidents of this country, John F. Kennedy, I would say that, when we make the conclusions of this conference, we should think about what he said and paraphrase him a little. Don't ask what the Doha Round can do for you, but ask what you can do for the Doha Round. Don't ask what cotton can do for you, but ask yourself what you can do to make sure that cotton is developing and helping to the poverty reduction. With that, I do pass actually the word now to His Excellency, the Minister of Benin, to make the real conclusions of this meeting. Thank you. What? You.
Non, lui ou lui.
Je comprends pas. Qu'est-ce que... Ah, ok.
Non, il y a d'autres interventions après.
Oui,
bon, je m'excuse là, j'ai insisté pour prendre la parole.
I wanted to take the floor because I thought that he was already drawing the conclusions and concluding the session, the conference. But I wanted to say a few words about this meeting. When I came here, there was a journalist, a famous journalist in our country, who wanted to interview me, saying that it seems that you're traveling for nothing once again. You're going to the United States, and it seems as though you're just going to take the plane and come back without doing anything. But I said to him, who told you that? And he said, well, that's what everybody's saying. So can you give me your opinion? And I said to him, well, if you'd like me to give you my opinion, I'll wait till I come back from the meeting. Because if I give you my opinion about this meeting that's going to be held in Washington, I'll have to wait until I've actually been there. And I think I will be going back with an entirely different response than what I had already had in mind. As I said here, I've been following these negotiations since the beginning, and I admit that the meetings that we've been having since yesterday, up through today, have given me much more hope and have made me more optimistic than I was before I came here. First of all, because yesterday we met with U.S. officials who spent an hour of their time with us to dialogue, and I think that this was especially important. It's important for Americans and Africans to begin negotiating again, and I think that this was a very strong signal. Secondly, in the various speeches that we heard today and everything that we heard yesterday, I saw a true willingness on the part of the Americans, and this is contrary to what the image that many people have. I think a lot of people think that they really don't have good faith and don't want to move ahead, but I saw quite the opposite here. I saw that they want to find ways to help alleviate African problems. Also, in the different speeches given by the development partners, the French, the European Union, the World Bank, I also saw that they too are want to move forward. So personally, I feel that this meeting actually exceeded our expectations, what we expected from Washington. So I would like to thank the conference organizers, ICP, Ideas Center, and the Woodrow Wilson Center. I think that this has been a very useful event. First of all, for the WTO negotiations, but also to help advance the interests of African countries. That's what I really wanted to be sure that I had a chance to say before the conference ended. So again, thank you very much for having organized the conference. And I sincerely hope that the proposals that have been made will be translated into concrete results in a near future. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Maiga, for this contribution that was also something that summarized the conclusions of the conference from a minister's point of view. Now the Minister of Benin. Thank you very much. I would also like to sincerely thank all the organizers of this conference. And I don't know if there are any conclusions left for me to draw because my colleague just drew some very good conclusions, and I don't know if there's anything left for me to say because he's pretty much summed it all up. Having said that, cotton is white, and so we need to look at the situation from a clear slate. It's a complicated matter. We need to look for solutions, and I think that we need to continue making cotton even more white, an even clearer issue. And I think that this reality is in contrast with the difficulties that our cotton producers are facing, because we realize that there is much that needs to be done before we can resolve these problems, and that is why we need to continue working fast before all of our hair turns gray. That is to say, we need to step up the process so that we can find a solution for our problems before we all become gray. I'd also like to say that when I came to this meeting, my president said to me, listen, I'm in Brussels, I had discussions, and I don't want you to come back empty-handed, because that won't serve any purpose. And I would like for the public perception to be changed, to realize that Americans, above all, have been working to help us resolve these issues. And I would say that it is the current leader, the one who is leading this dossier, that we cannot say, as many have said, that this is something that's going to be resolved in 24 hours. And that's perhaps something that maybe we've expected from the United States. But coming here, we know very well that there is no magical solution. However, we are also counting on American public opinion to continue exerting pressure on the American decision makers. And this is why I'd like to ask the press to continue conveying the message of African cotton growers who are suffering, who are dying day by day because they're poor, and because their governments don't have the power to make their voices be heard, and because their governments are not able to restore equity in international trade relations. For decades, our countries have signed various different international conventions without really understanding this. I'm sorry for having to say it, but that's the reality. We're signing them without seeing any results. And I think that starting from Cancun, that's when we see poor countries have really started to make their voice be heard. And although we are in an impasse today, it is because these countries are not being able to overcome the obstacles. This is how I see the current impasse with the WTO, and I think that it is in our interest to unblock this process and to pursue the negotiations, because as we've been saying since this morning, things are at an impasse, and what happens with cotton and with agriculture issues in general, despite what has been said, we need to find an ambitious, rapid solution, innovative solution for the cotton issue. It has been said that if we do not make progress in the multilateral negotiations at the WTO level, that the future of cotton will be bleak. If we do not make progress in terms of market access and market opening, we will do nothing. But in order to open markets, what do we need to do? We have to have a very healthy basis, first of all. We need to have all parties playing a transparent game, which is equity in trade. And this is the only condition that has to be fulfilled in order to have open market access. How can you have an open market if you don't have equitable rules and equitable trade? So these basic criteria must be met, and in this context, I would like to launch an appeal, and I'd like to make an appeal to the American authorities, an appeal to the European Union. And I'd like to call upon them, on these two powers, to review their positions and to revise their position, and to stop blaming each other and throwing the ball in the other camp's court, so that we can resume the negotiations and quickly find a solution for our cotton growers. But in the meantime, I would also like to launch this appeal. We have only asked for $200 million, and this as opposed to $4 billion in subsidies per year. This is all we're asking for. The subsidies that the U.S. grants its subsidies far exceed what we are asking for. $200 million for 15 million Africans. And this as opposed to $4 billion in subsidies for less than 27 million producers in the United States. These are the numbers that you need to compare in order to say that we came here not to beg, but to simply ask for the resources and to ask everybody to adhere to the rules that we have all established, that we have all agreed to, and that we have all signed off on, so that this can be the context, the framework that governs trade on an international level. These, Mr. Chairman, are the conclusions that I wanted to draw. And perhaps I didn't draw any other conclusions because you drew more conclusions, but I just wanted to say a few words to stress the fact that we are really counting on American public opinion to continue to exert pressure on your decision makers and your authorities in order to help us help improve the plight of African cotton growers. And in conclusion, I don't want to ignore also the appeal that was made to the donors and other partners for us to work together in solidarity to protect the African and to save the African cotton industry up until the point where we will have a satisfactory solution to the market distortions. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Ministre.
Thank you, Mr. Minister, for those personal thoughts on the objectives that you hope to have achieved here during this mission in Washington. I'd like to give the floor now to Mr. Ambassador Ameu. Thank you. I think we need to really thank all the organizers of this meeting that really allowed all of us to talk in a contradictory manner, and I think it's a really good thing. It was said before that cotton is white, but it makes for graying hair, and I think it is lucky that I don't have hair, because since 2003 there was not 1 week without a meeting on cotton, to the extent that I was nicknamed Mr. Cotton. Therefore, throughout the whole day, throughout the contradictions that we've heard, we finally came to understand that subsidies have a considerable impact on cotton prices, that subsidies have to do with the situation lived day by day by African cotton farmers. And in the past few years, they have been in dire situations, and we need to do something, in particular at a time when we have said. And I think we shouldn't go into details, otherwise we'll never finish today. But after Cancun, we were prompted to talk about cotton within the agricultural topics. This is why today the negotiations are at an impasse and nothing can be done within trade relations and the cotton issue. Today it was recognized that the real problem is what are we to do? This is an emergency. Before finding a trade solution, which is the main problem in cotton, what can we do today to save the cotton sector? No one, not the Americans, and the Americans will not want to have to contribute to the disappearance of the African cotton industry. But in the past 5 years, we've really raised a red flag. We have to say once again, like this morning, the only sector that is so organized in Africa is about to disappear. Benin was about to go through this. All it takes is for 2 seasons to not be able to pay the farmers, the cotton farmers. There are economic agents as intelligent as others, and they will stop producing cotton. In order to re-establish the sector, it will take billions of dollars to be injected. So this is what we're faced with. We know through the negotiations at the WTO, unfortunately, that formerly cotton producers like Brazil and Argentina are net importers of cotton. Cotton has disappeared from these countries. Thankfully for those countries, they have a couple of tricks up their sleeves, but our 4 countries have cotton only. This is the only commodity for them to bring in currencies. This is why this is good that today everyone recognized that. We need to address the most pressing issues. We need support projects, not the ones that we already have that are long-term projects. We need projects that would support our industry in the shorter term. If I remember correctly, the partnership meeting with our partners happened on July 13, 2004. That's when 15 million euros were pledged. Several meetings followed, and we were told this is about to disperse. Last week, the Benin president was in Brussels where this issue was still discussed. In other words, our partners need to find a funding structure. We need to think about solutions to save the cotton industry. This is really the bottom line. All these projects might come too late. It will be the medicine that will come after death. Therefore, funding is urgently needed. We have submitted proposals with the agreement of our partners. As it was said earlier, our partners need to now think about what they can do to save the cotton industry. We have made several proposals in that direction. I think that in 2003, on the 12th and 13th of March, there was a meeting in Cotonou on the development aspect of that issue. I think it is high time we discussed with the WTO to see how to have a follow-up meeting to this. It came out that this follow-up meeting is necessary in order to find out what failed, why we could not mobilize the funds necessary to save the industry. Like the minister said, we need to really take stock in order to go forward. We're all afraid that this meeting would be just another conference yet, but we heard eminent presenters, as my colleague said. Everyone here in this room will do something in favor of the cotton industry in order to save the sector that is such an important part of African economies. I would like to thank you all. It is a task that will cause a lot of hair graying.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur l'Ambassadeur. Moi, je suis
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. I am very happy for each hair that manages to turn gray, because I don't have that much. So, thank you very much, Robert Dawson. You have the last word.
I have the unenviable task of trying to do some summary between you and the bar, and so I'll try to be as brief as possible in my comments. But I think we've had a very good day in our discussion in this international conference on cotton. What next for Africa? We've kept the focus, I think, appropriately on poverty, that at the bottom of all of what we've been talking about is the reality that in sub-Saharan Africa we have one of the highest percentage concentrations of extreme poverty on this planet, with one of the highest percentages of people living on less than $1 a day. Many of the least developed countries of sub-Saharan Africa have the national average per capita income of less than $2 per day. And we know that 70% of the people living on less than $1 a day live in rural areas, and most of them are farmers. So what happens to the prices those farmers receive has a profound impact on their economic well-being and on the status of their poverty. In the high-income countries, one of the problems, I think, in this whole situation that we're discussing is the fact that our protection is not the fact that our protection or subsidies are so high, but that we have such differences in subsidies across commodities. Yes, we know that across the 30 high-income countries that belong to the OECD, collectively they're spending about $750 million per day subsidizing their farmers. This provides about 30% of the gross receipts of those farmers as a totality across the 30 OECD countries. But what really distorts the market is the fact that the level of protection is not uniform across commodities. We know that the four white commodities, cotton, rice, milk, and sugar, are much more highly subsidized and protected in most high-income countries than most other commodities. Throw in peanuts, four white and one off-white commodity, and you basically have the most distorted commodity markets. Unfortunately for the developing countries, cotton, sugar, rice, and peanuts are all commodities that do quite well in the tropics. And yet, those are some of the commodities in which they confront the greatest distortions in international markets. When you add to this the reality that we in the high-income countries impose some of the highest levels of protection on labor-intensive manufacturers, other products in which developing countries have a comparative advantage, we see why they have reason to complain that we in the high-income countries, while we talk a good line about concern about poverty, don't follow through when it comes to the reality of buying the products in which they have the greatest comparative advantage. Add to this the fact that we have escalate our tariffs, charging higher tariff rates on manufactured forms of the raw agricultural products, and providing even higher levels of protection to our value-adding industries in the developing countries confront a veritable wall as they try to take advantage of export-led economic growth. The economic research evidence is quite compelling that export-led economic growth is one of the most expeditious means of achieving poverty reduction and economic improvement in developing countries. But when we're discussing all of these things, one of the things that we often forget is the reality that when we depress the international market prices for commodities in which developing countries have a comparative advantage, we actually are increasing the poverty of some of the world's lowest income people, some of the lowest income members of world society, and that while a small percentage suppression of world market price may appear small to us in the rich countries of the world, when translated into the reality of rural Africa, a small percentage reduction in world market price can lead to a large percentage reduction in the income of people who are living on less than $300 per year total per capita. So with that as background, I turn to the issues related to stagnation of agriculture in sub-Saharan Africa, because certainly Africa confronts difficulties in the international markets for the products in which they have a comparative advantage. But we have to acknowledge the reality that agriculture in sub-Saharan Africa has by and large stagnated for at least the last 4 decades. African agriculture starts out from a difficult environment of having some of the least fertile soil on the planet. The African soil surface is probably the oldest exposed soil surface on the planet, exposed to more millions of years of weathering than other regions, and as a result, both the organic matter and the nutrients necessary for plant growth are at a much lower level than in most other continents. So the first challenge related to agricultural development in Africa is what I call the recapitalization of the African soil, rebuilding the organic matter and the fertility, because without nitrogen, phosphorus, potash, and micronutrients, there simply is no potential for plant growth. And those organizations which have encouraged Africa to refuse chemical fertilizers are not performing a service to the improvement of African agriculture. Second is the investments in agriculture research and technical change. The point has been made today at least a couple of times about the fact that much of the technology is being developed by the private sector, particularly the biotechnology applications in agriculture. But there's no reason this necessarily must be so. And in fact, the private sector companies will only make the investments in research where they have a possibility of reaping economic returns for their shareholders. But we in the high-income countries have in the past generously supported agriculture research through the CGIAR system, as well as strengthening national research capacities. But yet in the last couple of decades, this support has declined, and also the support given to agriculture research by national governments in Africa has declined, and as a result, the generation of new technologies by the public sector that are freely available in the traditional manner has stagnated. Third, in many cases, government policies turn the terms of trade against African farmers. And this is not only as a result of policies in high-income countries artificially depressing international prices, because in many countries in Africa, farmers have to pay more than the world market price for their fertilizer and other inputs and receive significantly less than the world market price for their products. To address the sources of this, we need to look at the value chain, which was brought out a couple of times today. When we think of the value chain from the farm gate, where the cotton leaves the farm, to the destination, whether it's national or international destination, there are a number of factors that influence how much of that world price gets to the farmer. First, and probably most importantly, is the transport cost. From my 4 years at the World Bank and 5 years of leading an international NGO working in agriculture development, a substantial part of our work in Africa, I came to the conclusion that one of the greatest underinvestments in agricultural development is in transportation and communications infrastructure in rural Africa. Transport costs are simply prohibitively high in many countries, so by the time the fertilizer and other inputs get to the farm, by the time the product gets from the farm to the port for export, there's simply very little net profitability left for the farmer to adopt even the improved technologies that are already available. When we add to this the fact, as we've heard several times today, that there's a significant discount in the cotton from the time it leaves the farm gate to the port because of deterioration in quality, that as a result of the conditions under transportation, here's another reason that we could increase the returns to farmers at the farm gate if we had more efficient and lower cost transportation. Inefficiencies in the ports has been mentioned. In some cases, they're monopoly profits, either public or private monopolies in the marketing system. Landlocked countries frequently confront substantial transshipment fees from their neighboring countries that stand between their borders and the ports of exportation. And when we add into that African countries in general have to pay a higher ocean freight rate to get the product from their country to the foreign destination because of their poverty, there's so little backhaul of products being imported into the country, we see that all of these forces together, on top of the effect of high-income countries' price-suppressing effects, all work to reduce the returns and increase the poverty of low-income African farmers. So there are many things that African governments need to do to increase the investments in these areas that will improve the net earning potential of farmers. But African countries have limited resources, so there's great potential for international development agencies as well as the development banks to supplement government resources to create the enabling environment for African agriculture to thrive to a much greater extent than it has in the most recent decades. But one of the challenges we confront here is that agriculture has simply not been on the development agenda of the World Bank or the other development banks, of the bilateral donors, or even of many African governments. My greatest frustration as the Director of Rural Development at the World Bank was that the fact that as we decentralized to get closer to our customers, move the country directors from Washington out to national capitals, and they interfaced with the ministries of finance, rarely did the ministries of finance tell us that agriculture was a priority. We heard this from the lady from the World Bank this afternoon, and I'd like to just second everything she said about the reality. Unless your ministers of finance tell the bank that agriculture is a priority, it will not be on the World Bank lending to your countries. Similarly, you've got to tell the bilateral donors that agriculture is a priority. You know, I'll be the first to argue that there is an incoherence between agricultural support policies in high-income countries and what we say in international trade. But there's also an incoherence between African agricultural policies and what you aspire to in trade. Your governments have got to tell the donors that agriculture matters, that it's not only poverty in urban areas that has to be addressed. Since the majority of poverty is in rural areas, if we don't work more aggressively on reducing poverty in those rural areas, we will fail to achieve the Millennium Development Goals because the numbers don't work. You cannot achieve the Millennium Development Goals unless you work more aggressively on reducing rural poverty. And to reduce rural poverty, we have to do more about agricultural development. So there's plenty of role for the bilateral donors, the banks, as well as African governments in achieving faster poverty reduction in rural areas, to create the enabling environment so that the African countries can take advantage of export opportunities as they open up. But the first thing we have to do is get the Doha Round moving again. Not only the Cotton Initiative, but also everything related to manufacturing and services is stopped dead until we get agriculture moving again. We had agreement to ban agricultural export subsidies, to align agricultural rules on export subsidies with those in the rest of the economy, we need to be sure that we don't lose that. We need to reduce trade-distorting agricultural forms of support as much as possible in the high-income countries. And I'd say even if this means box shifting. I know that box shifting is a dirty word throughout much of the rest of the world, but at least in this round, I think it may well be necessary to move from amber box to green box support without a large reduction in the total amount of support. But let's at least make that progress and move the distortions, as I pointed out at the beginning, where the 4 or 5 most subsidized commodities have a significantly greater incentive to be produced than other commodities. But let's move to non-trade distorting forms of support in this round, and then in the next round we can worry about disciplining green box measures. And finally, we do need to increase market access in all around the world through reducing tariffs. And this includes, I feel, providing unlimited market access for the least developed countries in high-income country markets for as high a percent of products as possible in order to create the opportunity for those countries to earn more foreign exchange and to stimulate their economic growth by this means. But unlimited access will not be sufficient. We have to have aid for trade. We have to have aid for trade in areas in which the developing countries have a comparative advantage. And as I said before, that means we've got to have aid for trade oriented to help increase the competitiveness in not only agriculture, but also the rest of the economy as well. So with that, Mr. Chairman, let me just conclude that the priority has to be on poverty reduction. Export-led economic growth can be a powerful engine for reducing poverty, but developing countries' resources alone will not make it happen. We in the high-income countries need to subsidize it, but I would close with just a final comment that it's not only market access in high-income countries that matter. Frankly, I think that all of us have focused perhaps too much of our emphasis on bashing open markets that are shrinking. The population of Europe is projected to decline 10% in the next 45 years. Population of Japan is projected to decline 22% in the next 45 years. These are markets of the past, not markets of the future. Except for the United States, whose population is projected to grow from 300 to 420 million because of our immigration policy in the next 45 years, all the other market growth potential is in developing countries, which are projected to have 3 billion more consumers by the middle of the century than were at the beginning. But without purchasing power, these are potential markets only, not real markets. And so we know that the level of protection in agricultural commodities is higher in developing countries against one another than it is in the high-income countries against their exports. And so increasing market access needs to be not only done in the high-income countries, but also in the developing countries themselves, because that's where their greatest market growth potential is as well in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bob. I think, Mr. Thompson, this has allowed to basically take the holistic approach to the issue of cotton and to put it into the context of the rural development and reminding us of what this is all about. That means the development, which has to be sustainable and which cannot be based only on one commodity, I think, for any country, especially not one that is basically a sunset industry like most of the basic commodities. I also think what you have mentioned in this conclusion, which is important, I think, to all of us, is to say that we all have to do our part in this business. You know, we have to stop blaming each other for what the other one is not doing, but trying to do what each one has to do to make sure that we find a solution. And this is, I think, was the purpose of this meeting. And I hope we do have at least partially attained that. And, you know, I'm supposed to give now the word to others if you want to continue the conclusions. But I warn you, you know, we are heavily into the happy hour already. So, you know, just if there is an absolute need, definitely, you know, please do. But otherwise, I would say, if you agree that we hereby, you know, I thank you very much for the participation. And I just want to, before you're leaving, I want to give you the word to William Kist from the Woodrow Wilson Center for the last words.
Yeah, Kent Hughes had to step out, so he asked me to just make a couple of very brief closing remarks. And so I want to thank all of you for all of your participation. We've had a lot of very rich and very informative presentations. As Ambassador Zongo said, now I think the thing is for all of us to build on these ideas so that we have a better tomorrow. Particularly, I think the thing that made this program so rich and so valuable was the participation of the ministers and others who came from the Cotton Four. You all did a terrific job of making your case yesterday and today. You did it with passion, and I think you did it with great restraint, and I think it was very articulate, and I think you made a big impression. I hope you also feel that it was worthwhile your coming here. As Minister Sumanu mentioned, I think we need to step up the pace now on all of this before we turn gray. For a few of us, it's too late already. But, for the rest of you, you need to step up the pace. I think we at Woodrow Wilson would very much like to thank the organizations who helped us and put this together. The International Food and Agricultural Trade Policy Council and the Idea Center. Really terrific, and it was a great pleasure working with Charlotte and Nicholas and their staffs. Here at Woodrow Wilson Center, I really want to thank our staff who worked on this very hard, and one person particularly, I don't see her here, Lynn Shaw, who just did a terrific job and worked very hard on this. So now I hope you all will join us for cocktails and conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. No, I think it was good. Merci beaucoup.